my heart is filled. I was really looking forward to tonight. I got to taste a little bit of some of your stories, but it is more than anything I could have imagined. You are amazingly strong. You are amazingly gifted and talented. Y qué cuentos, what stories you have to share. I did grow up with stories. I've always been very lucky that way. I had stories from the time I was very young. Mis papás, my parents, mis maestros, my teachers, whether they knew I was paying attention or not. I may not remember all of the lessons, but I do remember their stories. Y mis abuelos and my grandparents. I spent 3 months of every year living with my grandparents. From the day school let out in the end of school year in June until Labor Day, because school always started the day after at that time. 3 months of the year I would spend with my grandparents because my parents worked very long hours in the summers. And from then, I learned my love of stories. I also learned the crafting of it, how to stop and listen, how to take that breath and do what happens when things go wrong, like you freeze and forget all your music, or you're in the midst of something you could never have imagined. To learn to stop, to breathe, and then go on. Because if we don't breathe, of course, we're pretty much in bad shape. So I always stop to take a breath, especially when I'm nervous. And I stop to think through the stories. In every story, we have to have a problem. And many of you have lived problems. The rest of us can only imagine. But by sharing your stories, we, of course, can imagine them. And we can step into those shoes for a little bit at least to see from the other side. Y así nos entendemos, and that's how we can understand each other. Uno al otro, and connect one to another. Now, I do stories in 2 languages, as many of you do, as you speak in both. And I want to encourage, it's a great gift. I'm really only fluent in 2, but I speak a little bit of many different languages and spoke my first Hindi just the other night on Friday night. No, I don't speak Hindi, but I practiced and I learned because it was an interesting experience. And I wanted to be able to namaste, to greet my new friends that I was telling stories for. And also I'm reminded of my grandparents' stories because they both came to this country, like all of you, from another place. They came here without speaking a word of English. They had never heard English before. My grandmother, she was 9 years old and already spoke 5 languages, none of which was English. But like every immigrant child, she learned. And then when she was 92, now she spoke 6 languages. And at 92, she decided she was going to study Spanish. And when people looked at her, there were a lot of doubters. They thought, at your age? Why? Why are you going to start to study Spanish now? And she simply looked at them and said, and if I don't do it now, when? I should wait till I'm 100? And I went, yes, I want to be just like that. And then there was my grandfather. He told stories from morning until night. If I was having an argument with my brother, he just so happened to have a story about how to deal with a conflict or deal with a fighting with one another. If I was sad, he would have a story that made me laugh. If I needed to think about something, he had a story that would direct me in the right direction. He always seemed to have the perfect story. I remember when I was probably no more than 8 or 9 years old, I asked him about it because he told stories not only to myself and my siblings and every kid in the neighborhood, he did it for all the adults as well. And I asked him, Grandpa, how is it you always know the right story? And I'll never forget, he looked at me and laughed and told me a story. This is a story from his country, from back in the old world, as he called it. He said once there was a man, a young man, and he had been conscripted into the Tsar's army. Yes, he had to do his years of service, whether he wanted to fight or not. But during that time, during those 5 years that he was serving, he learned quite a lot about shooting straight and true. In fact, he even had a gold medal to prove of what a great sharpshooter he was. Thankfully, there was no great wars going on for him at that time, unlike some of you who have had to live through those moments. But at the end of 5 years, his service was done, and he could finally go back home, whether it was going to be the same home or not. We know that that's not always the same thing we think it's going to be, but he was looking forward to it. It had been too long since he had seen his family. So he took his pay, a good horse, and 2 loaves of bread, one of which he ate because he was hungry. The rest he put under his arm and started to head towards home, thinking about all of the things and the people and his family. But as he went past village after village after village, he went by one small one that made him stop right where he was. Even though, yes, he was in a hurry to get home, there was something that he saw that caught his eye that stopped him cold. You see, as he was going by, he saw on the side of a barn a sight that he could not explain. On the side of the barn, there were bullseyes, circles. And some of them were small and some of them were medium, some of them were huge. But the thing that got his attention was dead center in every single one of those circles. Every one of those was a bullet hole. I mean, dead center. There were hundreds of bullseyes and not a single miss. He couldn't believe it. Now, he knew a thing or two about shooting straight. I mean, he did have the gold medal, but everybody makes a mistake. How could this be? So he slowed his horse and he tied it up and he started to ask around. And he got the answer. He said, oh, that's Shmuel. Shmuel, he's the guy that cleans out the barns. He's the one that did that. A man that can shoot like that, he could be a general in the Tsar's army. I have to talk to him. I have to find out how he did this. This is amazing. How many years of practice? And to his surprise, he goes in and it's not a very old man. It's a middle-aged man and he's cleaning out the barn like his job said. He said, excuse me, are you Shmuel? Oh, yeah, that's me. Good day. Excuse me. I don't mean to interrupt your work, but are you the one who shot all of those bullseyes on the side of the barn? Oh, yeah, that's my hobby. I like to do that for fun. Excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt your work, but please, you have to tell me how you did this. I mean, I have a gold medal, but I think you deserve it better. How did you do it? How did you get all of those bullseyes without a single miss? And that's when Shmuel stopped sweeping. He laughed and started to explain. It's very simple. You should know my secret. You should know my secret? I'll tell you the secret. The secret is, first I shoot, and then I make the circle. And that, said my grandfather, is what I do with stories. I listen and learn and remember them. And sure enough, if I listen, learn, and remember them, the right time for every story will appear, a bullseye. In your stories tonight, every single one of you, I am so pleased to say, has hit their mark and made a bullseye in my heart. And I cannot thank you enough. Please keep sharing them. It was absolutely brilliant. Thank you for inviting me.